Hey, Casey. Thank you so much for joining us on this session about APIs.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks.
When you're just starting out to learn about using APIs, it's like there's this whole unexplored universe of possibilities out there.
Absolutely. You really just have to be bold enough to seek out the knowledge and navigate this new world.
For sure. So it really seems to be a journey into the unknown at first, right? I mean, wait, hold on. Do you guys hear that?
Is that feedback, or should I mute my mic?
No, wait. It's a creative segment.
Oh!
There's just too much manual work, Captain. We're gonna run out of visibility in less than 17 parsecs.
Try the API.
But Captain.
Route the data through the API and into the dashboard.
Creating a new connection where one didn't exist before could give us the visibility we need to stay on target.
I hope you guys know what you're doing. You might want to hold on to something.
Kevin, tonight's trash night.
In a minute, I'm playing Thwack Camp with my friends.
Okay, we should probably start the episode.
On screen.
I think one of the challenges is that when people hear the term API or application programming interface, they immediately think things are going to get really complicated and very programmery, and it's not. And so I want to start off with something ridiculously simple just to show how easy it is and how powerful it is. I've got a system here at my house called the Raspberry Pi, and on that Raspberry Pi is a software called Pi-hole. Pi-hole catches all of the requests and makes sure I'm not getting any spam ads or things like that, and I can get information out of it. So what this looks like normally is just a console that tells me the statistics of the queries that are being caught and the number of queries that are being blocked and so on and so forth. And what's interesting is there is an API that goes with this right here, same address /admin/api.php. That's just how I get to it. It's just a URL. And there it gives me the same statistics. It's not pretty like it is over here, but I've got the same statistics. And now what I can do is I can bring those into any tool that can collect them. I can either ping that URL repeatedly, or I can actually bring them into some software, like let's say SolarWinds. So here you can see I'm monitoring that same Raspberry Pi and Pi-hole software here in SolarWinds, in Orion, and I can use the API poller to create a new poller that pulls from that information. And what it looks like is this, same URL you just saw a second ago, and when I send the request, I'm pulling all the statistics that the API is presenting to me. So I have domains being blocked and DNS queries and whatever. And if I want to start monitoring, let's say, queries being forwarded, I can just go over here, click this, change the name or do whatever I want with it. And now I'm beginning to also monitor queries being forwarded and so on. And I can save that. And what you see are the statistics down below that it's collecting. And that's it. That's as difficult, as complicated as APIs can be.
Steady as we clear the space dock, Ensign.
I think there's something behind. I told you that an API would help us alert on data from the backup camera.
We probably need to automate that.
Okay, so it's great for this session that we actually have Casey here, who's a real programmer, as opposed to Leon and myself, who kind of fake it time to time.
Right.
We're script kiddies in a lot of ways, but I think we just need to dive right in. So Casey, what is an API?
So an API stands for Application Programming Interface, but I think in this context, we're talking about a REST API.
Okay. So what's that?
What is it? Yeah. Follow-up question.
REST API actually stands for Representational State Transfer Application Programming Interface, which is a super complicated and academic way of just saying using basic vanilla web-based technologies for two systems to interact with each other.
Okay. All right. So it's just another way they can talk to each other.
Absolutely.
So to use one of these REST APIs, do you have to be a programmer, or like what's the barrier to entry?
Yeah, really it's pretty easy, provided that you can just format a URL that adheres to the documentation. So you might have some REST API documentation that tells you exactly the format that the URL should be in. So for instance, here I've got, I want to see the roles that my user is in. So I've got roles, user, son of a gum, and I've just created a URL here. And then now I can see that I've got this whole response. So provided that you're, comfortable looking at the occasional, config file or something like that, you should be able to make sense of what the response actually means.
So you obviously use these to help us with Thwack. Can you give us a couple examples where you use this?
Sure. So anybody that's been on Thwack and is familiar with things like Thwack missions or the Thwack store, or using the chat feature in SolarWinds Lab, these are all actually taking advantages of different REST APIs. So this diagram that I've got here actually shows the current architecture of Thwack. So you can see we've got the ability to actually go check out that you've got a license that's valid with the SolarWinds licensing API. If you're using the Thwack store, we've actually got the ability to track your shipment status. There's a fulfillment vendor that's actually sending out all the different products to users that are ordering things. If you're using the missions, every time you answer a question correctly, that's actually going out to the gamification API and giving you points.
You are actually highlighting all the most critical parts of Thwack as far as a lot of our users are concerned. Give me my stuff, and how do I get more points?
Yeah. What is the
Keep going.
How much does it cost in points, and when will I get them? Done.
Right. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. And if if you like to chat while you're doing your SolarWinds Lab, the chat API is actually hitting a third-party API, and it really makes it pretty easy to pull in lots of new functionality without having to use a lot of the more Byzantine APIs that we used to have to depend on in the past, like Corba and SOAP and .NET Remoting and Windows Communication Foundation.
I am sad to say that I remember those systems. I really wish I had been able to forget them. But yeah, they were not straightforward. And I think that for those IT folks of a certain age, when you talk about API as being the inheritor of those, it's like, yeah, include me out. Like, I didn't like it then, but this is nothing like that. This is way simpler.
So I think one of the things that's interesting about this is we're not having to recreate the wheel all the time on Thwack. You don't have to go and actually build all this functionality. We're basically, it's probably not the right term, but we're renting this functionality from another provider. So in the event that there's some type of catastrophic failure, or we decide, in a certain amount of time that, we're going to move everything again, we basically just pick up this, these calls that you made and just put them on this other place, right?
Exactly. A lot of the times the actual integration work that I'm doing is just making calls to the third-party REST API. I get back data, that's got information about, the shipment, or your order for the store or the mission that you're working on. And all I'm doing is really formatting that stuff in a way that looks nice within the environment that you're in. So a lot of it's more about styling and integrating with that third-party service, as opposed to rewriting that whole service from scratch. And so you get a lot of leverage of existing functionality out there. And then if you do have to move from one platform to another, really most of the work that you're doing is just restyling things to be consistent with the look and feel of that new platform.
Oh, okay. But you actually have written at least a response to a RESTful API, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I write them all the time. So here's a super simple example of one of the methods that I would add to a REST endpoint that I'm writing. And this is my ping pong example. It essentially gives me the ability to check the health status of an API that I've got running. So you'll notice it's the URL simple. I start it with API, and then I'll have the version on the API, and then kind of a namespace. So in this case, I call it util, and then the actual name of the method is called ping. And the response that I'm getting back is just going to be something really basic. It's just Pong. So if I hook up monitoring, I can just call that URL and make sure that the response has Pong in it. And then I know that my web API is up and running successfully.
Look, we don't have to sell, all of us on the importance of Ping. I mean, it's
Yeah.
still
No,
it's still
Ping
an
is not a
important
problem.
tool.
Yeah, the fact
Right?
that it comes back with Pong, I just love though. That's
Yes,
why I felt we had to show this in this session.
Intern Wilhelm, please do not stray from the away team.
Well, that's a mess. Let's see if we can use an API to interface with this thing.
So one of the things we've actually gotten over the years is people trying to report from SaaS-based solutions. And one of the most popular one is Office 365, which is now called Microsoft 365 because branding things happen, which is fine. But one of the things we did years ago is we used to write a bunch of PowerShell calls that would go out and interact with something and bring back data, and then you would have to parse through the data, and it was functional. It was completely functional, but it was a little heavy. And Microsoft, in their wisdom, said, you know what? We need to build a better API for this. We need to say, there's a way you can call. And it's not just for the Office stuff. They also have a lot of other things. But if you haven't seen it, I want to introduce you really quickly to what Microsoft calls their Graph Explorer for their Graph API. So Microsoft understands, kind of like we were talking about, it's not always the easiest way to get into APIs, and they have two ways to kind of get started with this. The first one is, of course, their API reference, which is available on their developer site. But what I want to show off is the Graph Explorer, so I'm going to jump in there. So what I like about the Explorer is you can kind of browse around, and it feels like an interface a lot of us are familiar with already. So if I want to kind of get information from my profile, I click my profile. Here's the call. I can run the query. Here's the response. I am not Megan Bowen, which is totally fine. This is just the response that's kind of part of the out of the box. But if you actually want to look at your data to make sure you can compare it and it looks good, you can actually sign into the Explorer. So let me do that real fast. So now we can see me. And if I do the same thing again, say my profile, and then run
You are no longer Megan Bowen.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what I think is really interesting about this is profile information. This is obviously from Active Directory, which is part of Office 365, but it wasn't originally in the overwrapping O365. Instead, it is now part of Microsoft 365. I can find out stuff about my manager. And there she is. And I can look at specific applications or what group membership, or I can make calls to teams, or they actually are breaking out that these are some beta features that will probably eventually be rolled in. They're also really good about not taking away features. If they're going to have something there, they're going to make it available. But what I really think is interesting for something like this is like mail, because that's where the O365 kind of stuff started. So I can actually get a list of all my important mail. There it is. And it's running the query. There we go. And it just comes back in a big old JSON blob, which is fine. But what is interesting is you actually get the URL that call was made to. So I can see how the filter was built. This is importance equals high. But what's nice about this particular one, which doesn't apply for our monitoring discussion, is you can send posts as well. So you have your traditional kind of CRUD stuff. So you can actually send an email through the Microsoft 365 Graph API that will actually go out using this technology. I haven't done it except for testing it here, but it's something I'm really interested in.
And like you alluded to, the real impact for us here is that all this information can be monitored, it can be picked up, it can be tracked, it can be, alerted on, all those things, and all you're using is a URL to get that information.
Yeah, well, you're using a URL and you're actually using a set of authentication. And for that, what you actually do is to see that, you can go to access token. Now, here's my access token. I can actually take that information. So let's go ahead and I copy it to my clipboard. And then I can go to my monitoring solution. So I can copy my access token and the URL I want to use, including if I want to change the filter. And then I can build it into an API poller. So like before, create. And then I can paste in my URL. I can send the request, and this should come back bad. Correct. It's unauthorized because I didn't include my token, and that makes sense. So we would just say, you know what? I need to configure this. This is technically the Graph API call, and I want to do this with a bearer token. So I'll create a new cred, and this is for Microsoft 365. Paste in my token, save it, and just select it from the list. Save that, and send the request. And you can see the response code came back 200 and okay. So it's only pulling the first 10 items, which is fine. We can work with that because we can always request more and more. But this is the beginnings of actually how you pull information in. So it's not that complex a scenario, whether it's a bearer token or whether it's OAuth 2 or whether it's, standard kind of basic authentication on HTTP. All of this information is available. Then it's just learning how to cycle through it. Now, what I like about the Graph API is it kind of lets me explore as I want to build more information. Maybe I want information about Teams. Maybe I just want information on OneDrive, like how large are the files in OneDrive or how many files, just get a count. This is just pretty much a quick and easy call. Now, I need to preface everything with this is that this was built and is specifically bound to my account. If you want to do the same thing kind of for your, the admin level account to kind of get information about the entire Microsoft 365 infrastructure as a whole, you obviously have to have different permissions and have additional information. But this is really it. Maybe I just want to know how many are there. 10, save, and it's done. It's really that simple to use them in the Orion platform.
But the Graph Explorer also gives you sort of a little bit of training wheels for the experience, especially when you're just trying to figure out, do I want this value or that value? I'm not sure. It's a really nice utility to have it at your fingertips.
Yeah, it's one of the things, and I like the ability to be able to search and that have the API documentation right there. It's a click away to kind of see that information and be like, oh, yes, that's what I need. Or for that filter example we had, that filter's fine, but maybe I need something very specific. And although it gives us a clean example that makes sense to understand how the filtering works, like the fact that EQ is equals instead of the actual equal sign. Those are the kind of nuanced things you need to understand. And being able to actually have that all in one place is the way you can really kind of enhance the abilities and understand what you want to monitor and how you want to monitor that.
And this is a great place to pivot into something that I wanted to make sure was in this session, which was how APIs can help a network engineer. I know when you first hear about APIs, it sounds like it's really just for the, frou-frou for server and application admins, but that's not the case. Lots of network engineers now, lots of network gear now come with their own APIs. So just to use an example, here in my house, I have some Unify equipment. It's sort of on the edge of professionals, prosumer equipment, and it's got an API. So you see the data here. There's the IP address and the URL for the controller software for my Unify equipment, right? And I am, like a good monitoring engineer, monitoring my Unify equipment. There it is. That's, the IP address and everything. But I want to be able to collect my good, wonderful network information off of it. And there's an API to do that. So it took a little bit of kicking around, and I actually have a Thwack post about it. But there's a couple of URLs I needed. And Kevin, this goes back to the authentication that we talked about before. I found I had to authenticate first, and then I had to get the data I wanted. So the first thing I needed to do was to put in my authentication. And if I do that, it's going to be a whole bunch of errors. The remote certificate is invalid. Well, that's because it uses SSL, but I can tell it, yeah, don't check that. It's in my house. I trust it. Fine. Okay. So still bad because I needed to send it some additional information. I actually needed to put in some other values.
And this is the kind of stuff that you find in that documentation we were talking about. Casey said that the devs go and actually build the documentation. So if you just read it, that's how you got here.
Right, exactly. It took a little poking around. So I needed to set up a request body with my username and my password. That is not my password, but I'm putting it up on the screen. So when I hit the send request, and I do want to point out, this is a post, not a get. When I send the request, I get a 200 code. Yay, I got it. And in the response headers, I get a cookie that is my authentication token. So you can see that I've actually set that up and I'm saving it. Now I can go get the actual status health. So I hit send request. That is a regular get, and I get some data. I can get information on my WAN connection, what the IP address is, the number of bytes transferred and received, and so on. And I can start to monitor those things also. So there you go. You can see that with a little bit of kicking around, you can get the API working. And I have to admit that more and more network vendors are building APIs into their equipment. So it's going to become an even more necessary technique to use to get the data that you need out of your network gear as time goes on.
Now, earlier when we talked about Thwack and how it works with all these various APIs, but the Thwack platform right now actually tracks kudos as well. It's just kind of another metric. And with some reading in the documentation, understanding how to do some authentication and build kind of custom queries in it, I was actually to be able to pull out my kudo count. So right now I have 1,078 kudos on the current Thwack platform. So
kudos, yes, indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the other things we played with Leon and I, we were talking about, Leon, Casey, and I were coming back and forth about like, what can we show? What can we talk about? And I wanted to give one more quick example, and that's our folding at home project. So we actually have a team for SolarWinds in there. We have a bunch of people that are joined in where they're kind of just donating their extra CPU cycles to do protein folding. But these are unauthenticated calls that you just need some information for. Again, all documented on their site. So we can see here that like my personal credits are in the 77760, and my current rank is abysmal. But the team rank for SolarWinds, which we've only set up, I think, in February, we're already ranked in 3,500. So it's not bad. This is just a couple quick little examples of things you can do with APIs, and these are kind of more for fun than kind of like the real business end of things.
Kevin, dinner's ready.
Yeah. Thank you, hon. Yeah, we'll be done in just another minute. Yeah, thanks.
Scooter, set in a course for the Orion system. Full speed ahead.
Aye, Captain.